Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Slice of the Reef, our new podcast that demystifies the art of saltwater fish keeping. My name is Billy.
And I'm Giancarlo, aka Banana or Fishy Fish. We're going to be your guides today into the amazing world beneath the waves, but also in the box in your living room. Crazy, huh?
Enjoy and easy reefing.
Today, got an episode of the second season of Slice of the Reef. We are here with your hosts, me, Banana.
And me, Billy.
And me, inept. I guess I'm inept.
You're inept or
Hell yeah.
Chris. Oh, both work, yeah. We're
I'm
here live in literally opposite ends of the country to talk to you about today's topic, which is something that unfortunately one of us is going through right now. Chris, you want to do the title thing?
I mean, sure. I mean, I think that everything that, starts has an end, right? And so today we're talking about sort of the sad topic of what do you do when your aquarium crashes? These are complicated systems. They have complicated life support. There's a lot of interactions when you put things close together, and eventually something will go wrong.
Something has to give.
Something has to give. I
That's
recently, as in this week, had an issue with my 800 where one of the union valves in the return decided that it was no longer waterproof. And so it drained enough water that my auto top off, which is plumbed into my RODI reservoir, began topping off the tank, and it got down to 16 or 17 salinity over the course of, I was gone for maybe a day. So I don't know exactly when this purging started to happen, but the tank basically went fresh. My alert was I came home and it smelled like dead fish. I do have an alerting system. The automation managed to tell me that my pH was too high, which I don't think was the alert that may have caused me concern at that point. So it was basically a total loss. I had maybe 3 of the 108 fish survive. I had maybe 4 or 5 corals survive. And those are currently with the president of the local coral club. And I am working on recovering the system.
So sorry for your loss. And we are not alien to that kind of loss, although I probably haven't lost as much at one time.
I mean, it's crashes, I think, are like a sign of a seasoned reefer. As much as they suck, I think it's something that everybody goes through eventually, if not once and multiple times. And, it happens in like a lot of different scales, right? Like you were experiencing now like the full system-wide crash, right?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I was very fortunate in my previous escapades where I've had everybody's had some loss. Everybody's had some problems. But this really large tank has once it gets off the rails, it goes off the rails in a big way, right? So certainly the numbers are shocking, but certainly I think everybody can relate to having a disaster, having an emergency. Most of the friends that I've made in reefing have come from things where things have gone wrong and somebody reaches out and they say, hey, I know a guy. And that's how, in a lot of ways, the community spreads.
Very true. Banana, how many times has your tank crashed on you?
I've had like 2 or 3 crashes over the years, and they've scaled anywhere from like coral die-offs during transfers to like mass fish die-offs due to Brooklynella. And, every single time it hurts. I think like my first one was like on my birthday, like 3 or 4 years ago, where I introduced fish from a shady seller local to me. And, no one quarantines until they have to. And, by the time I didn't have to. So I ended up losing fish that I'd had since I'd started the hobby like 9-10 years ago.
Was that the Brook?
Yeah, that was Brooke. And it was pretty tragic for me. It was very emotional for me. Like the only time I've ever actually buried or like, did a little cemetery for a fish. Because I've grown those fish out from, since they were tiny. I've grown out that sailfin since it was like an inch. And now you had like a fat 7-8 inch, Dishardini tank that was, happy until I decided to cut a corner and I decided to like do something that I shouldn't have, and I suffered for it. Yeah, I think that's something that I realized that like now looking back on it, a lot of my crashes have been, I don't want to say self-induced, but they are things that I could have one way or another prevented. I know that's not always the case, but I feel like it's like 70% proper setup and then like 30% just shit happens. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's not just what you buy, it is how you use it. But I think that one of the main things when you have a crash is kind of the mindset. You have to think about, why am I in the hobby? What brought me here? And like, why do I love what I do? Right. Especially for me, because right now I'm sort of mid-process. And for the first time in 36 years, I do not have an aquarium in my home with fish or critters in it. Right. A lot of people come in for money. A lot of people, I mean, if you're a professional, it's obviously there's a money component, right? But I think that everybody, especially in saltwater, may buy or sell frags at whatever amount to sort of recoup their cost, or trade to the local fish club, or so there's some people who have sort of a financial component, and obviously these things do cost money. But also, like, I don't think anyone gets into the hobby because the first time they saw a saltwater aquarium, they were like, wow, I could make so much money off of this. It's not how it works, right? You kind of get into it for that magic, that wonder, and kind of keeping a hold of that is what'll get you through these crashes. And immediately after, especially in the aftermath, you kind of have to remember that, it is part of the thing where you do design the system, but it is also a potential failure. But you have to look at it a little bit pragmatically. You can go, yes, every single coral loss is potentially a failure on someone's part. It may be the shipper's part, it may be the provider's part, and maybe in your part, right? But these things live for thousands of years in corals cases, and most saltwater fish in captivity will live about 30 years. Most aquariums don't last more than 5 or 6 years, right? So whereas, yes, it is almost always something someone could have done, it's not always practical or pragmatic to build in, like NASA builds to 2 of 2, where there's 2 systems with 2 redundancies inside of every system. So you need to have at least 4 points of failure before anything bad happens, right? So it's not always pragmatic or possible to build a home system that way.
Oh yeah, I agree. And that's like sometimes when like shit happens, right? Like things just gonna happen. But I don't mean like having like 50, fail safes and things like that. I just mean negligence. Like I know on my issue, for example, my lack of quarantine was negligence. And then when I had SPS die off because I wasn't dosing elk and I decided to raise my elk up like 3 points at once, like that on my part was also like negligence,
Or sometimes even ignorance, right? Like maybe you just go, oh, it'll be fine, and you had luck up until that point, and you just make a decision. Yeah,
and it happens. I mean, like your sponge shoots. I don't know if like you want to go through into the sponge shoot.
I mean, we can go through the whole thing. The 800 has been a tour of hubris on my part. I did have a quarantine break. Maybe through shrimp, maybe through net. I had disease get into the system. I still don't fully know how that happened. I also then took in a lot of large colonies from someone who was having a tank breakdown, and he had a very pernicious sponge that he was able to combat effectively because he was able to reach his entire tank. But I was not able to combat that very effectively. So like I got this sponge from him, and he hadn't seen it in his he hadn't seen this tank. He hadn't seen it in his tank for a while. But whatever was keeping it in check in his system was not present in mine. And it just sort of took off and covered everything in the tank. I didn't really pay much attention up until that point that my silicates were high. I had really high silicates in my top off water, and I just paid it never mind because, it's just something that you get. You'd see it in the roadie, you'd see it in the ICS system or the water tests, and you'd be like, oh, silicates are a little high, top off, that'll sort of build up. And it sort of created this condition where this sponge, which was very toxic, could explode. So once I'd gotten that sponge from this person and his tank breakdown, it sort of just blew up all over everything. It was all over everything. And it was sort of my last large event. And I mean, we sort of learned, don't have big aquariums, I guess. If you can't reach the bottom, your aquarium might be too big.
Oof, yeah.
A life lesson and a half right there.
Yeah.
Well,
so
we're still gonna
that
do
was
it.
a quarantine. Yeah,
So
I mean that was a
you can't-
quarantine failure as well, right? Like biosecurity is serious business, and when the tank is too big to manage, once it starts getting derailed, sometimes these crashes like can certainly happen, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I think like my personal belief, and that's as cliche as it sounds, it's not about the crash; it's about how you recover. It's like it's fine to have a crash. It's fine to have stuff die off, so long as it's not like a repeated thing, right? Like if you have your stuff all die off in like a quarantine, and then you continue to just not quarantine, and it happens again, and you buy your stuff again, and it happens again, and you just keep on doing that. At a certain point, it just becomes like I don't know what the word for it is, but it's like it's kind of on you.
Irresponsible.
Yeah, there you go.
Insanity.
Yeah, insanity. It's like it's irresponsible to that certain extent to like continue to, reef without any, I don't know what the word is, backup. Like without learning your lesson. If you're gonna crash, crashes happen. Crashes are normal. Every person in the hobby is going to go through either at some point or another, they're going to go through a crash. It's going to be a soft crash or a large crash, whatever, as hard as it like sounds, right? Someone's eventually going to go through it, but it's a matter of like learning from your mistakes and then seeing what you could do differently and actually implementing that difference so that you don't go through the same kind of thing again. Because people that do go through the same thing over and over and over again, either usually don't last in the hobby or they last too long in the hobby, in my opinion. I don't know. What are your thoughts on it?
I mean, I've said before that the difference between a new and a veteran reefer is how they handle loss. It is sort of an unfortunate part of the hobby that in shipping, things die. Upon receiving things die. And no matter how experienced and no matter how careful you are, eventually you will lose something. When we say tank crashed, we really say that you're just losing a lot at once. So it's a question of scale. And how are you going to handle that when it happens? As careful as you can be, you can have, multiple copies of hardware. Like you can have multiple copies of pumps. But, they're now captive breeding Acropora. And the lifespan of Acropora is thought to be 4,000 years. There isn't a pump in the world that is rated to last 4,000 years, right? So what you're going to do when things go wrong, how you handle it is going to, one, mitigate that loss. If you can catch it in time, it's going to be test your knowledge. Like, what do you know offhand? And your network, what do they know offhand? And it's going to test your ability to respond to that, your preparedness. So being prepared, staying calm, making sure to work through the boxes can help either mitigate, reduce, or, minimize any kind of losses when you have sort of a mass event.
When that happens. Billy, you had a crash as well, right? I think.
Yes, I have. Thanks for reminding me.
I'm sorry.
It's a hard episode.
I've had two fish crashes, both due to lack of oxygen, because return pumps die, or I leave a lid on that is solid glass, etc. And then I had a bacterial bloom that bloomed right during a hurricane after it knocked out our power. So my camera was off. So that was fun.
Yeah, one of the things people don't talk about also is how hard it is to deal with people after the crash, right? Because you have to check your own pride.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
It's a
like
huge
I said,
wake-up call, yeah.
Up until now, I've been briefing for a couple of decades. A lot of my 10-year-old me experience. So when I was, like 7, 8, 9, it was freshwater. But like once I started reefing, like I have a fair amount of experience. I have seen most things that can go wrong have gone wrong in either my experience or someone I know's experience. I assisted in a couple of published papers, right? I helped in research labs in my undergraduate. I have kept a lot of species and reproduced and worked in hatcheries. I have a certain amount of pride in my ability to design, set up, and run a system. And to have any crash or multiple crashes it's humbling. Like it is something that you feel like you should have done or you could have done. And so the first thing you have to do is, your own self and your own pride as it sort of crumbles. But then also everyone comes along and they have something to say. Did you do this? Did you do that? What about this? What about that? Next time, do this. Next time, do that. And, you have to have the humility to at least hear them and try to consider your own viewpoint and your own biases, right? It doesn't mean they're right, but like that is, to me, one of the hardest parts of having these crashes. And one of the reasons why I'm being so public about these crashes is because it's better for me to just get it out there and talk about it as opposed to just swallowing it up and then resetting the tank and then just being like, oh yeah, nothing happened. Like I have a big enough tank, but it's the internet. I could hide, but but it's kind of irresponsible, right? Like you do owe it to yourself and your critters to get the perspective, but it is hard.
It's a part of the hobby, I think. Like it's like the part of the ever learning, ever growing hobby, like the fact that you're never going to know everything. And even if you do know everything, there's still stuff that we don't know. And there's still stuff that we're going to learn. And there's still stuff that we're going to, have to adapt through and push through.
Yeah. Or sometimes, it's just equipment failure. Like in this case, it didn't leak for 4 years and then it did.
Yeah. And out of nowhere.
Yeah.
It's like,
the flip side of that is you can't be the guy that gets everybody's advice and then doesn't listen to them, because that's going to get you out of help quick.
Oh yeah,
that's me. I never listen to anyone.
What's this guy's name again? Who is this guy?
Billy. That's Billy.
Oh, okay.
Billiam.
Just kidding. I think I'm pretty good at it now. In freshwater, I just never listened to anyone though, and stuff kept going wrong. And I was like, "What's going on here?
Why are my phosphates at 9?
9 ppm, baby. Badge of honor."
Yeah. So, how you approach a tank crash from the moment you get home and you see something's off to like how you fix it is huge. And like that alone can have drastic effects on like the outcome of your crash, what you can save and what you can't save, and what you end up doing afterwards, whether it's short or long term. That's why we introduced like this method called the S.C.A.L.E.S method. The S.C.A.L.E.S guide to like how to manage or how to approach a tank crash. Kind of like when there's a fire, it's racing, rescue, alarm, confine, and then you evacuate or extinguish. The S.C.A.L.E.S is like the approach that we have here to how to deal with the tank crash or how to like approach it. And then we're going to read them off and then we'll go through like what each one means more in depth. Billy?
Yes.
If you want to do the reading, because I know you like to read.
Here we go. Okay, so it's called the S.C.A.L.E.S system. S.C.A.L.E.S plural. The first S stands for stay calm. The C stands for check parameters. The A stands for assess equipment. The L stands for look after livestock. The E stands for environment stabilization. And then the last S stands for sustain stability. Just great with my whistling S's.
I came up with it with you in mind. I was like, what would Billy like to say?
Just make him say as many S's as possible.
What we need is the popping S. Well, anyway, stay calm. That's important. Like, and the other thing is you got to realize that this is livestock on the line. It is a priority, right? So this is kind of an emergency situation, but you do want to stay calm. A lot of people freak out. It's a lot of money on the line. Your pets are dying. But if you are in a hurry or if you go in a rush, you're going to make it worse. You will absolutely make it worse if you don't stay level-headed. You need to recognize that it's happening and then pivot to address that. I had guests over when I came in the house and there were 4 or 5 people who were coming over for dinner, and I had to be like, well, one of you is going to have to cook dinner because I have to go scoop 100 fish out of this aquarium. Right. It was a blizzard. It was a blank wall of white. Right. And there were obviously fish corpses sort of floating by the glass. It was a great mood for dinner.
That's some Game of Thrones shit. Jesus.
So you got to stay calm. Like, you got to pivot and you got to handle this. Right. And it may require that you cancel or address some plans, but if you let it go on, it will continue to happen. So stay calm.
Stay calm. Yeah.
What does the C stand for?
Is you check your parameters. Check your parameters immediately. Whenever, like, I have the big 3, right? And it's like pH, salinity, and temp. pH, salinity, and temp. If there's anything that's like gonna cause a tank crash, that's big. One of those 3 is usually going to be the issue. That's like an immediate solid. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like one of those things that can like immediately be changed or immediate. The easiest to check, the easiest not to fix, but the easiest to know, like, yeah, this is what caused my problem. It's going to be your temperature, your salinity, or your pH.
Yeah. pH is a good one because it's an index of like usually your alk and your calcium and a lot of the other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Yeah, I would like recommend you check these 3 first, and after that, you go into testing your ammonia, your nitrate, phosphate, alkalinity, magnesium, calcium. But these 3, like in Annette's case, for example, salinity would be the one that immediately gives them like raises alarms. Hey, this isn't right. This is a problem. I had another friend who had an issue with a small tank crash going on over the last weekend, and his immediate response was to go to test alkalinity, was to go to test his nitrate, phosphate, and they were all fine. And I was like, well, what's your temperature at? And I was like, what's your temp at? And it turned out that his heater had failed. And so his temp was dropping down to the 60s, where, you really don't want to near that problem. But thankfully, everything's fine. His stuff all came back. He raised the temperature up. His fish started animating a little bit and started swimming again. But primarily, the first 3 things you should check is pH, salinity, and temp. And also, it helps to have these on hand, because when you do eventually ask for help, when you post it on the forum or on the server or anywhere else, the first question you're going to get from anybody is going to be, what are your parameters? That's like the go-to default question, to the point where if you're going to ask for help, don't even bother waiting for someone to ask you. Post this is my problem. These are my parameters. Yeah, that's the fastest way to get straightforward to help me find a solution to your problem.
And there is a universally hated response to this question. They'll say, my parameters are fine. My parameters are perfect. I don't care. Give me the numbers.
No, what are your numbers? Yeah.
I had a guy who was trying to help one time. He was having algae blooms, and it came out that he was trying to do a water change free system.
Of course.
And so he was, lambasting everyone that you don't have to do water changes, and it was fine. But his nitrates were sky high. His phosphates were sky high.
Hold on. Did you say lambasting?
Lambasting? How do you say it?
Lamborghini.
Lambasting is what you do before you eat lamb.
So what's
anyway?
He was fighting the whole club.
Yeah,
this was in person. And he was just going at it, and everyone was like, well, just do a water change. And he was just like, I don't have to do water changes. His nitrates and phosphates were through the roof, and his problem was that he had way too much algae, and eventually we just had to let it go, right? But know your parameters, give the numbers when you ask for help.
Damn right.
Just right on the bat, don't even wait for somebody to ask you. The moment you're having an issue, if you're thinking of posting, if it gets to the point where you're thinking of posting, asking for help, you should already have your parameters ready to go. It's like homework 101, reefing 101, parameters. And that'll give you the first wave of knowing what's wrong or what's not. Because if either your parameters will tell you something or they don't. And if they don't, you move on to the next section, which is, Billy.
That's me. The A in S.C.A.L.E.S stands for assess equipment. This is when after you've obviously ruled out the more horrific equipment failures, like a top-off issue causing salinity spikes, or
What's
a
that
heater
like?
causing temperature spikes. You want to assess everything else, including the heater and the top off, because they could still be contributing to the problem while not manifesting the problem as a parameter issue.
Yeah. So a good example of this is if you have an equipment failure and it creates an issue, a lot of times people will have dosing, and it'll be an obscure parameter that they may not be able to check easily, like iodine. And the doser dumped, and that parameter may be sky high, but you may, not test it readily. You may have to send in an ICP test to get that parameter. So check your equipment, and it can often give you a good hint. One of my friends had a Nopox dump. The auto dosing head that he had on his Nopox blew a gasket or something, and it went full siphon, and it dumped a liter of Nopox in his 100-gallon tank. Blizzard.
Which, for those of you who don't know, is a gigantic carbon dose, which causes what?
Nutrient deficiency.
No.
Yeah.
Nitrate deficiency.
No, it causes a bacteria bloom, idiot.
Causes a bacteria bloom.
Nope.
And then
carbon.
hypoxic conditions.
Yes.
Oh, that too.
So yeah, and so Nopox, if you don't know, is a phosphate treatment from Red Sea to try to get nitrate and phosphate out, right? And it works by basically having vinegar and vodka, and it causes the bacteria to grow, and then the bacteria get skimmed out, right? Because as the bacteria get larger, their phospholipid bilayer is hydrophobic, and they're attracted to like air bubbles and stuff. This is how skimming works. But anyway, technicals aside, you dump a ton of it, a ton of bacteria grow, it gets cloudy, there's no oxygen in the water, stuff starts dying, right? But all he knew was his tank was cloudy until he went through all of his equipment and he found his empty dosing container. And he went, oh, there should be more of this in here. And he found the problem, right? So after you check the parameters, you should check your stuff. Like, are all your pumps working? Are all your dosers working? Are all if you have automation and control systems, are they all as expected? Trying to think of other equipment.
Return pump. I think you already probably said that.
Yeah, for pumps, power heads, wires. In some cases, you can have stray voltage get away from you.
Grid wires is huge. I had a quarantine tank where I was using like those cheap $20. It was like those $20 for 3 wave makers that you would get off Amazon. And the wires would get frayed. And I didn't know what was wrong. I was like, why are my fish dying? What's going on? I stuck my hand in the tank and immediately felt like a buzz in my arm. And I was like, this isn't right. And then, it took for a little while for me to figure it out.
This isn't right. I shouldn't be electrocuted by my aquarium.
It was a little tingly sensation. And I was like, It's weird because it's like, I don't know if it's from me holding, because my quarantine tank was up high. So I don't know if it was because I was like holding my arm up in a weird angle or if it was the water. So it was like me just standing there, sticking my hand in and out of the water to see if like tingling sensation came and went, which is like not what I would recommend anybody to do. That's definitely not how you test for stray voltage.
Well, it's one
Clearly,
way.
It's just a proper solution. Yeah, you're supposed to taste
long-term solution, because once you get electrocuted, you can't do that anymore because you're dead.
Yeah, you only get one shot.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just me standing over there, like purposely electrocuting myself to see if there was an stray voltage. But when I pulled out the pump, the wave maker, right, it had like it had both wires just openly exposed. And these they were relatively new. They weren't like oldish or like wave makers that had been storing for months or years. I got them new, put them in. They were running for like a month before the fraying happened. And since then I go paranoid. But it could be stuff that you just don't expect. I've also heard of situations where like heaters I love titanium heaters, but there's also situations where like they'll build up calcium deposits on the stem inside of the little plastic case that they're in.
Oh.
And sometimes people don't like account for that. Like they don't notice because, you don't really look at the inside of your heater when you do your tank maintenance. And so that'll fail to heal. That'll fail to heat. Or you'll have other issues going on from that as well.
I mean, it's kind of a test of how well you know your system, right? If you check the parameters and all the parameters appear normal, what looks off. I've had situations where snails, vermitids have grown inside of power heads, and then I've gotten kind of lazy.
Oof.
Right. And then usually this happens with gyres more than your traditional power heads, but the gyres will get jammed on like a snail or a vermitid or something that got in them. And that's usually not an entire crash situation. Like usually your skimmer provides most of your oxygen exchange, but it can change your flow profile and all your corals can be closing up and being upset and everything's pissed off. And, you're trying to prevent that sort of cascade at that point. So checking all of your just sort of known operating equipment, making sure everything works, like pumps, heaters, all that. But if I were to say, it's always the heater.
Usually is.
Usually, yeah. I mean, we haven't found a proper way to like heat up a tank without using like a metallic spicy stick. That's like
they are delicious, but they will.
It's just funny because like we're in the hobby. It's like the most feasible way that we have to heat a tank. Just stick a giant metal stick in it and wait for the tank to get hot.
So I did for a while try to keep my garage at tank temp. And so I had a big old IR heater, but it just wasn't getting there. So
then you're just sticking like a metal stick in the air though. It's like same thing, just transitive.
Well, I mean, we could light a fire, but that's probably frowned upon.
And water is famously the enemy of fire. So you might have some drama there.
I don't believe that's true. I think I made that up.
If all goes well, the tank puts out the fire and stays warm in the process.
Wait, yeah, that's right. I think that's how the heaters we have now work. They're just constantly starting fires and then the water puts it out.
That's it.
Okay, so at this point in the S.C.A.L.E system, you probably have access to the issue, or at least...
Yeah, or you look at your equipment at least, and you're like moving on to the next situation, which is looking after your livestock. Like I've said earlier, these are living, breathing animals that you're working with. These are, organisms that have been pulled from the ocean or bred or whatever that are entrusted into your care. So primarily you want to focus on making sure that they're okay. If your issue is with like a lack of oxygenation in the water, or if your issue is with a virus or something that's getting loose in your tank and you see your fish are reacting to it, ideally you want to jump into the quarantine method of it. I'm not saying like throw any medication you can into your tank, but once you kind of have an eye or like know more or less what you're dealing with, there's certain treatments or things that you should do to protect the current livestock that you have. If your issue, for example, if your issue is with, in Chris's case, right, his coral weren't responding happy to the low salinity. So what he did was he rehomed the coral, right? He took care of the livestock rather than just leave it in the tank and kind of ego his way through it all, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple of things you got to do. When you have immediate and obvious death, you want to remove that, right? So if you have a dead fish, you want to pull it. Dead coral, less so. But you have to realize that dead and dying coral are a recipe for brown jelly disease and similar. So you kind of have to keep your eye out. But the priority is the livestock, right? That's why these systems are in place. That's why we have the aquarium in the first place. And, you can replace a pump or a heater. You can't necessarily replace Ember, the Achilles tang. So you want to look after your livestock. And if your tank is no longer hospitable to life, then you want to rehome them. Could I have hung on to my tank and sort of left stuff in it? Like, would that have been irresponsible? No, probably not. But this is the second or third major issue with the tank, and I thought it was time for a complete overhaul of all the systems. Just doing some storing up, making sure that things stay good. Like I've had 3 or 4 years of this tank running, and every year something seems to sort of give, right? So I wanted to go through and just do a whole end-to-end check for everything, and that takes time and energy and effort. The tank shouldn't be full for.
Yeah, I mean, this look after livestock is more like an immediate response kind of thing, because it does lead into our next step, which we were kind of talking about, which is environmental stabilization. So once you've like immediately responded to the currently like the sick or the declining livestock, pulling out what's dead, if fish aren't breathing well, moving into a bucket, if your coral are dying, dipping, or treating them, then you want to kind of stabilize what's going on in your tank that caused the crash or what led to your crash, right?
Sure, yeah, but also the other thing that you got to consider is that your livestock are going to be impacted for a longer term here, right?
Oh, yeah.
So fish are more disease susceptible after a stress event. Coral may bleach and then they may get back their color. They may not. They may stay closed for a couple of days. So paying a lot of attention to your livestock during and after the event, try to sort of make sure that they get what they need, make sure everybody's still eating, check for an outbreak like ick. These sorts of things are always going to sort of happen after a high stress event.
Yeah, main thing I focus on is aeration. I just have battery powered and normal powered air stones. I just drop in everything.
Yeah, this is sort of a normal, no, I wouldn't say normal. This is one of the more common crash events is a power loss, and that's heat and aeration, right? So definitely aeration is a really good one. Plus any kind of problem that you have, like I was talking about the no-pox thing, you can sort of slow those effects through aeration. Aeration is a really good first emergency step. In fact, in a lot of fish hospitalization and high-tech quarantine labs, one of the things that they do is they will actually hyperoxygenate the water, where they'll get oxygen canisters and they will pressurize it so that other gases will degas.
Whoa.
And so they get a higher than 100% concentration of oxygen, and that combats things like parasites in the gills that make it hard for the fish to breathe, right? So yeah, the super fancy guys also go with super fancy oxygenation as sort of an emergency saving step.
That's really cool, though. I kind of just want, I have an aluminum canister. I kind of just want to fill it with oxygen and just like plug it in, see what happens.
I mean, we can talk about that and maybe in a quarantine episode. Talk about the super fancy quarantine stuff. But let's go back to environment stabilization.
True, very true. So at this point, you should know what's wrong with your tank. But if you don't, that's fine, because you just follow the system and you'll be mitigating as much of the losses as you can. The E in S.C.A.L.E.S is where you take steps. Wait, did we already say this? I forget if we already said this.
Read your E, my guy. Read your E.
The environment stabilization is when you take actions to stabilize the tank environment, including water changes, adjusting temperature, or adding activated carbon. A water change solves pretty much any problem, and usually in emergencies this is the case. In certain situations you might not want to do a water change, but those are pretty unique and specific. In general, most things can be diluted or mitigated by just replacing the bad water with some good water.
9 times out of 10, you're right. As long as the parameters are okay-ish, or even if the parameters are whack, as long as your equipment works, as long as your livestock is being handled the way that it needs to be handled to retain a situation compatible with life, so aeration, heat, water change is always a great first or second step when things are done. But environmental stabilization is stabilization for a reason. Stability is king. Even if you don't have ideal parameters, not chasing numbers and keeping things stable is always the best bet. So it can sometimes be a situation where water change won't help. These are rare, usually salinity related. So in situations like mine, where we had a very, very fresh water system, the system had suffered a terrible shock. In the course of 10 to 20 hours, 50% of the salt was drained out. Obviously, this is not a situation compatible with life. The fish were basically shedding their skin like snakes. It was terrible. Yeah. But if you were to just suddenly then salt the water to full C, then anything that wasn't dead would be dead then.
Yeah.
So some things you do want to go slow. Alkalinity, salinity, you want to make sure to move them a couple of points at a time. Obviously, salinity, if you've got to go down you just take a bunch of water out, and then you can have the top the system off. That can cause your alk to swing. So then a water change is still a good idea after a while. But salinity and alk are the two where water changes may not be the good idea, but they're almost always a great first step. Parameters for ammonia, nitrate, pH. If your alkalinity is out of whack, obviously, dosing to get to stability is a good secondary consideration. But water changes are usually a good, cheap, easy thing to do. Plus, there's a lot of hormones and stress hormones that your fish and your corals will be releasing, and getting those out helps. So water changing your activated carbon,
wet skimming
dosing
is my favorite thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Honestly,
I kind of wet skim all the time.
Skim what you can. People think that if they're not dry skimming, there shouldn't be skimming, but wet skimming means that there's just more to pull.
Well, I mean, also you have to consider the contents of skimmate is primarily carbon. So it's also a certain amount calcium. I didn't prepare for this conversation, but by solid weight, skimmate's like 10% calcium or so.
Oh,
wow.
So if you're skimming wet, while yes, that is good advice because you're getting more bacteria out, you're getting more waste product out, you have to consider that skimming wet will impact your alkalinity and calcium parameters. They will require that you dose more alk and calc.
And also salinity if your ATO is not accustomed to losing that much water.
Crash number 1. My skimmer skimmed out a bunch of water and my auto top off freshed my tank. That's crash number 1 4 years ago.
Damn. You have a salinity fluid situation there.
I mean, not really.
Oh. Well, it was a pun because fluid. Never mind.
No, I got you. I didn't know you spoke whale.
Okay, so water changes can help. Obviously, check the temperature of everything and bring it back up to a habitable level for whatever you're keeping. Activated carbon is kind of a miracle. Just make sure you rinse it if you can, because obviously that particulate carbon, I mean, does that act like a carbon dose if it's dissolving into the water? Defines from activated carbon?
You mean the little black powdery thing? I don't think it acts as a carbon dose.
I don't know enough about chemistry to answer that.
I don't think it's a carbon dose.
Anyway, rinse it if you want. Otherwise, just adding a big bag can help pull a lot of really bad stuff, including all those hormones Inept was talking about, out of your system.
You gotta know, though, too, that carbon's not active for a very long time after you put it in your system. So don't expect it to last like months.
Yeah. I mean, also, a lot of people don't like to run carbon because, could be tangs, could get whatever, hole in the lateral line, whatever.
Erosion, yeah. HLLE.
Yeah.
Head and lateral line erosion.
Yeah. There you go. You know the words, the fancy ones.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't like to run carbon if they have tangs for a lot of reasons. Maybe they do or don't. It also pulls out some of the good things that you dose, right? But in a high stress or sort of stabilizing environment, it's never a bad idea to run carbon for at least a little while you get things stabilized.
Very true. And remember to replace it more often if you're going to be pulling out a lot of crap, because its capacity will be reached even faster. Okay, so we talked about environmental stabilization. Banana, would you like to talk about sustained tapata?
Yeah, after you're going to sustain tapata.
You put so many S's in a row, dude. I can't handle that many.
This is made specifically for you. So ideally, right, you've had your crash, you've kind of stabilized things a little bit, your temp's back up. The goal is, and this is mainly the part where it's like learn from your mistakes, you want to implement a plan or preventative measures to avoid not just all future crashes, but at least to avoid this crash from happening again. If your stuff dies from, lack of quarantine because you introduced something bad, you will hopefully then start quarantining moving forward. Or if your stuff dies because you didn't have a leak sensor, you'll hopefully have a leak sensor down the road.
That's fair.
So water doesn't flood, There's only so much you can do, though. Like we said earlier, there's only so many redundancies you can add, but the more you can do to prevent the same mistakes from happening, the better you'll be off in the future and the more feasible the hobby will become for you.
And I mean, obviously, the answer is always just spend more time in front of your aquarium, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like monitor the situation closely. Enjoy your pets. Make sure that you never leave ever.
Vacations gone.
Yeah, vacation's overrated. Why go to a beach when you can go to your aquarium in your house for free? Well, not for free. Anyway, there is a validity to that statement, though, because the more time you spend at your aquarium, you're not only learning what to look for in terms of issues, but also what to listen for. Like a lot of my tank issues, I know immediately that something's wrong because the sounds are different. Something's gurgling or isn't gurgling, or it's splashing in a different way, or it isn't splashing in a different way. And you can only really absorb those kind of sense memory analyses by spending more time with your fishes and your beloved corals and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, as we know about Billy, historically, his tank is always gurgling. So I guess if it ever stops gurgling, we got to be careful.
It's gurgling right now. I closed the door for you. You're welcome.
Easy. Gurgling.
Yeah, and this will actually condition you over time. You'll get sort of a sense of if your tank is good or not.
Yeah.
My daughter actually just started tumbling rocks because she's at the age where crystals are all the rage.
Yeah.
And if you don't know this about tumbling rocks, you basically fill a cylinder with rocks and water, and then it spins for days.
Quite loud.
And what that sounds like is a pump out of water. So it has been a 4-week-long panic attack culminating in an actual tank crash over here.
She was trying to warn you, and that's rough.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. A big coral sent her in so that you wouldn't notice your tank leaking.
Coral.
Big coral. It was a plot that big coral. Big coral is watching.
It's true. You're too big to be allowed to live. That's why that sucks.
Damn. But yeah, let's okay. So you've got, we've gotten the scales out of the way, staying calm. Actually, Billy, you want to say scales again?
Scales.
Yeah.
That's how I tried to fix my speech impediment.
Stay calm. Stay calm. C, check your parameters. Right. A, assess your equipment. L, look after your livestock. E, environment stabilization. And S, sustained stability. Scales.
Yeah. So let's talk about how do we identify a tank crash, right? Like how do you know when your tank is really crashing versus when it's actually kind of like in a low kind of thing, right? What are some ways that what are some first steps you take when you realize that your tank is crashing?
Cry.
I mean, yeah, cry a lot, really.
Right.
The first thing you got to do is take a step back and sort of assess to see if it is really crashing, or did you do something to make it behave weirdly? Maybe you left the feed cycle on. Maybe you added hydrogen peroxide. Maybe you put in some Aptasia X. And the whole tank is pissed off because of something you did or didn't do, right? You got to take a step back. And this is part of staying calm. You just got to see what's up, sort of take stock. And this is where spending time with your tank while it's healthy can really help, because you can quickly notice things that way.
Yeah. Without a doubt. By knowing what's going on, by knowing how things are when they're good, you'll have a better chance of catching things when they're not.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people have automated feeding cycles, and that changes their flow quite a lot. And that would cause a panic for someone who doesn't know their tank, right? Yeah. Oh no, the flow is off. I gotta solve this immediately. Oh no, it's 4:00. The fish are getting fed, right?
That's happened to me once or twice. But not because I don't know the flow is off, just because I have no sense of time.
You have no sense of anything.
So what are your notes on this? What are your thoughts? What hasn't been said or what should be said? What's missing? Do you agree with the scales? Do you disagree with the scales? Do you think to change the name to I don't know, something with more S's for Billy to say?
I mean, It could be scale, it could be scales, because we're, environment stabilization and sustained stability. I realize that, we're trying to make that be lessons learned after action, sort of remedial representation, or etc., to sort of make the acronym work. But scale, I think, works just as well.
Yeah, scale works.
But definitely it's a good system, and definitely it starts with stay calm for a reason, right? Definitely, if you want to ask for help, remain calm through the asking for help. There is, there's nothing more frustrating than trying to help someone and they don't listen, or they won't communicate, or everyone makes their own decisions, but they came to you for help for a reason, and they're just freaking out, and they're going, oh man, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, there's a time for that, and that time is after the crash. Once you have the situation diagnosed and on its way to stability.
One thing I don't think we talked about is to kind of preempt tank crashes by learning from other people's mistakes. The mistakes that we mentioned on here are some things that, now that you have the hindsight that we have, you can pretty easily prepare for and try to mitigate preemptively. I just have air stones in my tanks at all times, 24/7 now, because of mistakes that I've made in the past. I'm really careful when I do carbon dosing or no-pox dosing, because I know people who have kind of like played it fast and loose with the dosing and just carbon dosed and nuked their tank temporarily.
Oh yeah. I think
just learn from the community around you.
Yeah, I agree with you with that. I mean, it's important to see how other people go through things and like try to, take care of it, like prevent it from happening to you. But I think another part of like another hole that we as reefers fall into is the whole like it'll never happen to me mentality. It's like, I'm never gonna have a tank crash.
You get this especially with quarantine.
Yeah, I'm never gonna get brook. All of my fish are fine. I'm never gonna get ick. I'm never gonna get velvet. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, it's like, hey, my fish are gasping for air. What do I do? I don't want to. And, I think a big part of the hobby should be like not shaming people that are asking for help.
Yeah.
After they've been in situations like that, because then they're just not going to ask for help, and then they'll stay quiet and their fish will die, and then they'll get discouraged.
And you are denied the possibility to learn from their mistakes because you don't get to kind of dig into it with them and try to figure out what happened.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think like another aspect that we should keep open at all times should be the ability to learn. Again, so long as a person is willing to learn. Because I know there's like people situations where they'll be just so fixed on one thing that they're not opening their minds to the possibilities of like other things that could be causing their issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Using the community, being willing and open to learn. I was really proud of someone recently. They reached out to me. They were having a dyno sort of take off in their tank. I gave them the playbook. They followed the playbook. They didn't have any problems. They got in, out, and through it like a pro. And it was because they were able to ask for help. They trusted me to come to me with the problem. They followed the instructions and it worked, right? So definitely learn from your environment, but also, maybe also think about who you trust with your advice sometimes.
Yeah. There's a lot of advice. Every single person is going to have an opinion. So I guess it's up to you to determine like who you are going to get help from, especially with some issues like if self isn't happy or if you're going through a crash, there's going to be like 10 different ways to like approach it. So it's up to you to know your tank and to determine which way is the best one to go for you.
Yeah. And crashing is extremely critical to have at least one person that you're going to trust more. Maybe that's yourself. Maybe that's a trusted advisor. But in a crash situation, you don't want to chase the rabbit and have 5 people with 5 different opinions. And now you're creating a lot of environment instability because you're trying to change 9 or 10 different things.
Yeah.
Very true.
Very, very true. So, Chris, your crash, do you feel like you're going to restart, right, from your crash, the most recent one?
I am unfortunately afflicted. It is not possible for me not to have an aquarium for long. It's not
an addiction. It is an addiction.
It's not an option. I feel like I have a lot of things that have been taking the focus off of the tank. I have a couple of small businesses I've been starting. I've been doing a lot of stuff at work. We had 3 different reorgs last year, and my home renovation is sort of half done. Also, a lot of my emergency and redundant systems. So I have a frag system that I have been building out, and I just never got around to finishing. And doing those things could have saved me a lot of money. A lot of money.
And like $20. So much money.
Like $19. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I will be back. Obviously, you got to remember what you do this for. And for me, it's a recall to that childlike wonder. I grew up with aquariums. I grew up watching the fish and the coral and the shrimp. I got a marine biology degree for a reason. It's not possible for me to escape the hobby. I have seen, no offense to anyone present or listening, I have seen more people come and go, and it just couldn't be me. So I'm absolutely going to start again. It is going to be my longest dry spell ever, obviously, because it's been my first dry spell ever. Wow. And I'm going to do some things to finish up around the house to make sure that I can give the tank my full attention when it does get up and running again. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Better to whole ass one tank than to half-ass around.
Right. I think Abraham Lincoln said that. Better to whole ass one tank than et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
No, he had the original Reef tank.
That's not true.
The Civil War
let's not spread misinformation. Come on.
Civil War was about the right TK4. That's all fucked. That's stuff you're getting cut.
And we're done. Bye, everyone.
And we're canceled.
Cut the feed. Cut the feed.
Yeah. So do you feel like that's like a little bit of like excitement for you though, Chris, now that you get to like kind of start from scratch? Or is there more like dread than like anticipation?
So I'm in a unique position, whereas I have enough favors owed me in the hobby that I only pay for coral if I want to. So it's not as much dread as sort of after the crash, right? And right now we're in that phase. You got to really look after your mental health. Yeah. Because depression can set in, despair can set in, if especially I identify heavily. Icon is a fish. I'm a Pisces even. I identify heavily with like aquariums and stuff, right? And it's deeply frustrating, and it can be very depressed. Like I didn't get out of bed all day Sunday.
Damn.
Tank crashed. I got all this stuff packaged up, shipped up, sent out, and I went to bed for like 30 hours. I was like, I'm just gonna bed rot. So, you do have to take care of yourself too through this. It can be very frustrating. And obviously people want to help, or people want to try to help. So having the kind of patience to just say, yeah, okay. And then just sort of putting that off to when you're ready is something that I'm doing right now. I'm debating on how I want to do this. I feel like...
Me, by the way. That's me. Talk about me.
So I do have a lot of respect for Banana as a reefer.
I'm at his DMs. I'm like, hey, when can I come over and set up that tank for you?
Oh.
I do have a lot of respect for Banana as a reefer. And I do kind of think the way that I might make this special or do something with it as like a community event, right? Like put together the design, put it up online, maybe have you and Billy out and we'll work on it together one weekend to set the thing back up again.
Yeah.
Get all that stuff work done, get a I don't know, camera up, post it for people who follow the podcast. I don't know. So like, I mean, that is
just don't let Billy do your electrical.
What do you mean? I'm great at that.
So but that is definitely for tomorrow, right? Like that is something we will get to it. Like I'm excited for that project when it happens. And I think that it'll be a great time and a great story because, and I say this and always have, when you reef together. It's important to have your community. It's important to care for your community, because when especially the tank crashes, your community is going to be what sustains you. They're going to be the people that bring you back. They're going to be the people that you have the memories with. Like the biggest loss is not, and this is going to sound a little cold-hearted. The biggest loss is definitely going to be the stories of the corals that you got from your buddy that you flew to his house and like got a coral, and then you flew back with a backpack full of coral, right? Like that story's gone now, right?
We can do it again, though.
I mean, always could. Do it again.
We can do it again. Yeah. Absolutely. Look at the bright side, though. At least your Asterina problem's taken care of.
That's true. I don't have vermidid snails. I don't have Astrenia. I don't have. What else don't I have? Aptasia. There's no more ick in the system.
No more ick free. But yeah, I mean that kind of leads us to like the myth of the week, right? Which is like something that a lot of people feel when they're going through it, like the tank crash, and that's like that is the end for them. You know, that they're starting over from scratch, and that they're like all their progress is gone. And that's not necessarily true. You know, a tank crash doesn't mark the end. It doesn't mark it can. And for a lot of people, it does mark like the end of the hobby. And sometimes the loss is so devastating and financially and emotionally like tolling that there is no other choice but to just kind of like call it for a bit, right? Or like call it for it. But usually a lot of the times when it comes to a tank crash, there's ways to keep moving forward. And there's ways to kind of recover or like softly bounce back from what happened. No. So I feel like it's a myth. I don't know. What do you guys think?
So I think it goes back to my point about community.
Mm-hmm.
This is why it's good to not think about this entirely about money, right? Because if you're a business and you have a tank crash, you're going to take that financially right on the chin.
Yeah.
But if it's about community for you, then your community's got you, right? So you get out what you put in. Obviously, if you help people out, you give them good deals or free frags. If you come and you help them when they have their issues, or when they have their crashes, then when your troubles come, they'll be there for you. Obviously, some people are not like that. Obviously, some people are just selfish and they'll just take. So you do have to apply this judiciously, but very, very much in my experience, the reefing community is the biggest thing you gain after experience.
That's true. And that's something that'll last you like after your tank being shut down, after your tank coming offline. Like the community will always be there. Even if you're not able to be physically with your tank or, like see your tank running, you're always going to have the community to fall back on. And you'll always be able to see like the new reefers coming in. But yeah, let's tiny fish of the week. Bill, you want to take this one away?
Yes, I learned of this fish recently when it popped up on a wholesale list. It's called the fingered dragonet or the mothered dragonet.
What's the Latin name?
Dactylopus.
What is it? I think there's an error. I heard you say Dactylopus twice.
What are you? Oh, no, that's my stutter.
Oh, you say it again, please?
Whenever I speak Latin, I say the name twice. Dactylopus.
I heard it twice again.
No, I said it twice. It's a stutter.
You didn't. So wait. So it's Dactylopus?
Yeah.
Huh. Dactylopus.
And it looks like someone took a scooter bunny and glued a bunch of mods to it.
A mod, it's Diablo.
It's got underglow with the little like neon from the
It has a spoiler that's a different pattern than the bottom half of its fin. Freaking wild.
Can't update it without latest update.
It'll probably not be available in the hobby very often. I assume the care requirements are similar to that of a scooter dragonet.
Except for it's 11 inches long. What?
I was going to say, except they can get a little bigger. But they literally have, it's not called the finger dragonet because it looks kind of like a hand, but it does. It literally has modified pectoral fins or something that can function as like little scoopers or little sifters.
Yeah, I was going to say wild. This looks like the
batfish,
walking fish. Yeah,
walking
the little robin.
Yeah, walking batfish.
Well, there's that, and then there's the flying canard, which is the one that has the fingers. The walking fish, they just have like paws, basically.
Yeah, but have you seen the sea robins? Right.
Ooh, yeah. It looks like that.
Oh, yeah.
So sea robins have like little spider legs that they walk around on.
Gross.
Oh,
But they also have but they also have those big, wide sort of fins.
The fins.
Have you guys heard of the sea moth? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, the sea moth. Sea moth. The one with the nose, right?
It looks like seahorse got squished into a bee costume. That's what it looks like. It's like it's a wide body dragonette. But yeah, so there's a bunch of like really cool members of the dragonette species or family, whatever.
That's one that you don't see very often. I hear about very often. They're really, really cool. But yeah, I think you're right as far as their care being similar to like a regular dragonette, just except for the fact that they just get so freaking big.
Yeah, they were listed at like 2 to 3 inches at the wholesale. So I guess they got baby mother dragonettes, which is iconic. Oh, and they're micropredators, so good luck feeding a foot-long fish.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think if a fish gets that big, they'll start eating like more than just pods.
I would hope so, but it doesn't seem like it.
It may just be that they eat bigger pods.
Bigger pods or, bigger shrimp.
I mean, the other thing you got to realize is that in the ocean, and this is the problem with phosphates, is that resources are functionally limitless, even if they're scarce, because the ocean is large enough that there's enough of them around, right? So just like even though phosphates are low, coral never runs out of phosphate because current will always bring it more, right?
Yeah, there's always going to be something available to it. That makes sense. Yeah, very, very, very cool find, Billy. Thank you. Thank you for bringing this to our attention.
You're welcome.
What tank size would you recommend for one? If somebody wanted to keep one.
I would say a minimum tank size of 70 gallons based on the Lab Aquaria article I just looked up.
For an 11
it's a foot-long dragonette. That's not going to work.
I would honestly say that for this fish, it's going to be benthic. It's going to stay on the bottom. So bottom area is going to be much better suited than a gallon rating.
That's true.
Like I definitely think like if you had like a 40-gallon frag, like he might be okay in there if he was like the only fish in it, right? But like feeding it would be a nightmare. Like if you want this thing to graze itself, you're going to want at least one of those big hundreds. But like, will it physically fit in a 70-gallon? Sure. But I wouldn't recommend that because 70 gallons are typically longer. They're usually like 75s, they're usually 55s, but tall.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Just really tall.
So I don't recommend this in a tank that doesn't have a big footprint. Right.
Or short 90s.
Just put it in like a mangrove, like a lagoon tank, like a really deep.
That would be really cool.
Deep or wide?
Wide, not deep. Deep is, not tall. Deep or wide. Deep and wide, just not tall.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a saltwater pond.
Yeah.
There we go.
Put it in a freaking tank.
There you go. But yeah, that's what we've got. That's our S.C.A.L.E.S method. You heard Billy say the letter S a lot of times today. Thank you for that.
I'm sorry in advance. Or you're welcome.
Chris, anything to add? Anything you want to add? Anything you think?
Nah, man. I feel like I did more than my fair share of talking today. So you carry the next episode.
Yeah. Bananas.
All righty. Thank you guys for listening to another episode of Slice of the Reef. It's been a pleasure here with Banana and Chris and Billy, who goes by Billy.
You forgot my name for a second there.
We'll see you again in 2 weeks. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks, everyone. Farewell and easy reefing. Thank you for listening to another episode of Slice of the Reef,
your number one podcast for all things fishy, with your hosts, Giancarlo and Billy. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else that podcasts are held. That way, you'll never miss an episode. If you want to be a part of our podcast, join us on discord.xyz/Slice of the Reef, where we'll be recording in front of a live audience. We also give you a moment at the end of every episode for a live Q&A session, and we're very interactive with our fans. So we'd love for you to join. You can also check out our website for articles, guides, calculators, and information on our upcoming episodes at sliceofthereef.org. Hope to see you guys soon.
Farewell and easy reefing.